You are listening to Cemetery Confessions, the world's #1 goth talk podcast.
Hello and welcome back to Cemetery Confessions. This month we're going to be talking about our greatest fears and how goth culture has helped us to deal with them. We're going to be talking a bit about cemeteries and death, as well as the punk scene and a bunch of other goth history. We'll also be reviewing the new album from Lost on Me and giving our Sinister Suggestions, among other things. A little preface before we jump into the episode. We had planned to record this with a guest, and unfortunately, at the last minute, he had to drop out due to an emergency. So we decided to go ahead with the episode, and literally 10 minutes before we recorded, I put a blast out on Facebook asking if anyone was awake and in front of a microphone. And the first response I got was from Skullgirdle. From YouTube. So we jumped her right in, and the preceding chaos that you're about to hear was us trying to figure out what the hell we were even doing on this episode. So I embraced the shit show, and what follows is, I think, pretty entertaining. Eventually we do find our footing and get into some pretty serious topics. So I think you'll really enjoy this episode. As always, thank you for hanging out with us, and let's get into the show.
I can't imagine 20 hours of listening to an album you don't like that much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, shit, I wasn't recording already. I was going to do that joke bit at the beginning.
Okay, well, you could re-record it, and I could pretend like it's brand new.
That removes all the spontaneity out of it. That's
I know.
That's no fun. But I might as well just start the episode. I actually didn't even have an introduction for this because I wasn't sure what we would end up focusing on the most for the episode. I was going to record that in post because there's a bunch of different topics that get covered here. And I was planning, the guest I was going to have on, he likes to talk a lot. So I was just kind of going to pose a question and then see where
and just let him talk for an hour.
Yeah.
Just
and
sit
then
back,
cut out
just
this.
let him go.
The world's laziest podcast. Oh, that's awesome. Okay, so where's
Mark? Did you get the album?
Yeah.
Did you listen to the album?
I did. I
Okay.
don't have a detailed review. I didn't review it by
that's
track
fine.
or anything. But
Michelle,
what
you
is
listened to
the-
the album, right?
what fucking album is it? Is it Leper? How do you choose your bands? Because I have never heard of this shit.
Exactly.
Okay.
I try to avoid the more new releases that are for bands some or most people would know, because I don't think that's interesting. I want to, especially if someone's just discovering the show, I want them to hear about something they haven't heard. So I specifically try to find the more obscure music, because I think that's.
Well, I want independent because, first of all, I'm not going to get blocked by it.
Mm-hmm.
But you'd be surprised. But yeah, I want to be able to play snips of stuff and just bands that aren't like The Mission or the Sisters of Mercy.
Yeah.
I just don't do intro music because once I realized everybody seemed like they were doing it, I was like, fuck you. I'm not doing it. I don't have to do this your way. I don't have to be professional. So, I'm not.
And that's why we love you.
Yeah. Well, I like to keep the spirit of YouTube, and very disappointed in a lot of goth YouTube right now.
Yeah. I just watched a It's Black Friday video today because I was like, I haven't watched her in like 3 months. What's going on? And it was just, I was like, okay.
Is it check out this makeup line? Or
Actually, no, it was a life update thing. And I know a lot of YouTubers do that, but I and that's just me. It's just my preference. There are very few content creators I want to actually hear talk about what's happening in their life.
Right.
There are some I'm like, oh god, I just don't fucking care.
Sometimes
I'm like, I don't care about your cat. Seriously.
Yeah.
I know it's terrible.
what I want is I want to know what is going to be happening during the time that I'm spending consuming your content, and I want you to get to that part of it as quickly as possible and for it to be good.
Right.
Which is the opposite of what's happening right now, but I'll probably cut all this out anyway. But that's what I try to do now. I try to say at the beginning of the show, this is what we're talking about. This is the guest, and let's talk about the thing we're supposed to talk about. And that's why I like splitting the episode, because before, when it was one show, the title was the last hour and a half. And my initial thought was, oh, well, people will want to come and listen to that part, so they'll sit through the rest of the episode to get to like the headliner. No. But yeah, that's not how it works. So
5 minutes in, they've already clicked off.
Exactly. Yeah, that's this.
I want instant gratification.
Yeah.
Right. People can't even make it through a whole 5-minute video. So, I mean, how are they going to make it through your 3 hours?
Yeah.
I go back, so I'm like, oh shit, I missed something, and I go back, but
some people do.
I mean, I'm supposedly working.
See, that's the difference, I think, with YouTube and podcasts, because with YouTube, you have to be watching it. With a podcast, most people listen while they're like doing the dishes or mowing the lawn or driving to work or something like that. So you have time for the long form stuff. You can't really stream a YouTube video when you're on the train, because you're going to eat up all your data. And podcast files are much smaller. Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know why people do media they do. I know I take a lot of shit for not having Instagram, but I don't care.
Yeah, I made one.
I don't want to post pictures for likes. That's just not me.
I know there are a lot of people that use it, though.
Yeah, the young people are on there. And you could just tag it with upper class goth.
Oh, Jesus fucking Christ. Somebody messaged me and said there was a debate. They're like, there's a debate happening on the Undead and Unpretentious group, and I think your input would be greatly appreciated. I'm like, oh, God, what is happening? I haven't looked at it yet, but I'm going to check it out tomorrow.
Right, because I think you posted something about that, and I was like, wait, what? And I went and looked it up. I was like, of course. And so then I posted, and then they posted on that group. So, just kind of.
Did you hear about that, Mark?
No.
There's Simon, Cole Candy YouTuber, and Adora Batbrat use the hashtag, and probably some other people use the hashtag upper class goth.
Like upper socioeconomic class.
Well, it's just,
or like
there's no real
or like
context.
Not a freshman, or like a senior.
No, I think like the best goths, the best of the best goths, I think is what they're actually aiming for. You think? That's what it seems like.
Probably, which, yeah, if you're going to do that, I mean, we already have vernacular for that, like uber goth, and it's all implicitly self-referential and sarcastic. Whereas upper class goth, doing your own thing, makes it sound like you are actually being an asshole elitist, like dick bag, because there's no context for it.
Especially when you are admittedly, say you're not goth, but you're wearing a little bow in the back of your hair that says goth on it.
Yeah. Well, and I think I said my issue with Simon is that he did some videos early on about being inclusive and embracing who you are and blah, blah, blah. But then all of his videos are interviewing pretty skinny people. And
he did, his early videos, he did have more people like that in them, more just normal people in them. I don't know. I just went and unsubscribed.
Yeah, I have a couple friends who have met him that are not skinny, and they said they felt like he kind of snubbed them because and so
I've heard that.
I don't have time for that. So hot takes.
So let's get to the actual podcast.
I'm just seeing.
Have we even started though?
I don't know.
I did start recording about 10 minutes.
Yeah, it says recording.
We'll see what actually happens. Let me see. Someone else messaged me. You guys mind if I drop one more person in here? A friend of mine who I think it's Lilith. Mark, you know who that is.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't care.
Do you mind, Michelle? Okay, cool. We might as well. If it's going to be a clusterfuck, might as well make it as much of a clusterfuck as possible.
Let's have a circus.
That can be the topic, just an improvised clusterfuck.
I planned on editing.
Maybe there'll be 10 of us.
No, I think we'll stop at 3, because then I'll just be adding people for the next hour, and then we'll never actually talk about anything.
This can be just like one of the reject episodes, like cemetery rejections.
It'll be like every 15 minutes a new random surprise.
Then we can all be like, who the fuck are you?
Well, everyone will have to reintroduce themselves every 10 minutes, and it'll just be this
Oh, God.
time loop. It'll be a Doctor Who episode.
No, it'll just feel like you're at work.
I got beer in my eye. God damn it. Junkyard Bat said we should do the stream where anyone can jump in and then they have to prove their gothness or I kick them out.
It's like goth initiation. We're like a fraternity.
Oh, we get to beat you in and beat you out, punch you in.
It's
if you make it in, we beat you off.
Well, then everybody's going to want to be goth.
3 strokes. Oh. Sorry.
That put horrible images in my head.
Ejaculating bats. Let's just think of that.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that.
The fucking Sesame Street count.
Yeah, me too.
Jerking off Big Bird.
Thanks, guys.
No, man.
Thanks a lot.
If this boy did this, and the gothic, stuff that went around it and the motive and everything, don't we all sort of want to know, that could be our teenager, that could be our kid doing that. How could that possibly happen?
Being described as being involved with the goth movement, but what exactly is that? We kind of know it when we see it, but some aspects of a goth lifestyle could they provoke such a murder?
All right, so this month's this month's news article is titled "Goth Didn't Die, It's Always Been Dead." Brazilian Goths talk to us about representation, style, and cemeteries. So I want to read just a portion of the intro to the article and then kind of jump into the actual responses from the interviewees and talk about the kind of themes that come up. So let's see. The article starts off by saying, people have been debating whether rock and roll is dead for a while now. As for goth culture, no one is worried about whether or not it's alive and capable of attracting more young people to the scene. In Brazil, it simply exists wherever there are 2 kids interested in Gothic architecture and poems about sickness and death by modernist writer Augusto dos Anjos. Which I dig that. That was my experience growing up. That was kind of the metric I went by. Like, I understand how vital clubs and events are to keeping a scene alive, but I guess because of what I initially valued when I entered the culture, that sort of in-person interaction and small private spaces and just having a common interest in literature and morbidity and that kind of thing, it was always important to me. That's kind of why I started the podcast too, because that was always really important. And I think, Michelle, you said that was similar to when, at least your early experience was, there was a lot of discussion about literature and just hanging out and stuff.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, actually hanging out and listening to music and talking about whatever last incredibly depressing classic existential literature you just read. But this Augusto dos Anjos, I know I'm saying it wrong. I know I just said it in Spanish. He only lived for 30 years and he wrote mostly about sickness and death. So that makes kind of sense. Long time ago.
Right on.
Yeah. And I just to hedge my thing here, I get that goth culture is more than that and it's grown beyond that and evolved. Mm-hmm. But all those core experiences of the community, wherever you get that, the discussion aspect of it, the late nights of drinking or just hanging out and having meaningful discussions was always like super important to me. So
right.
There's something special about that, and you don't get it really at the clubs. I mean, you can, but it's not the same as just like, just a more quiet location.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like you would have these philosophical discussions at your local IHOP or wherever.
Yeah.
Just with your friends in general, whether or not you're all dressed up in black or whether you're just hanging out, getting the stink eye from the waitresses. Just talk about this stuff that seems so deep now because people were reading literally reading the Metamorphosis, the No Exit, Lestrange, all that kind of stuff instead of reading Poppy Z. Bright and I can't say
Yeah.
Anne Rice because people were reading that then too. But I forget who the other author. I'm like, who is that? I've never read a Poppy Z. Bright. I don't know what they're like. They could be
Edgar
really good.
Allan Poe. Yeah, I don't know either.
People did read Edgar Allan Poe, but he was not necessarily the biggest topic around my friends.
He's the OG goth, first of all, so better slow your roll there, sister.
No comment.
No, speaking of Stank Eye, I was honestly surprised when, this is completely off topic, we had our first experience at the school my son's going to be going to, and I went to, most people were nice, and someone is not, see, now I'm getting a million text messages from people asking if they can come on the podcast. At one point I went up to a group of teachers to ask where something was, and I stood there and waited for them to finish their conversation and then asked if they had a second to help me, because that's what they're there for.
Mhm.
And they all turned to me and gave me this same like wide eye look up and down. Two of them didn't even say anything because I think they seemed intimidated, maybe, I don't know, but I was really surprised because I was conscious about, I didn't overdress. I smiled when I interacted with anyone. I was very friendly because I was trying to make it make other people as comfortable as I could, but I was still getting like, who is this person in my building? So I guess we've got a whole year of that going on, so that'll be fun.
More like 12.
Oh yeah, that's true. That's true. All right. Well, anyway. So then the last part of the intro I want to read, they say, but the subculture continues to suffer the same ills that befell the punk movement. The aesthetic has been analyzed and commodified for sale. Goths frequently find themselves reduced to the stereotype of gloomy, probable Satanists who occupy their time drinking cheap wine in graveyards. No, actually, I drink expensive wine in graveyards, first of all. That perception is far from true. In reality, Goths are avid consumers of 19th century literature who are genuinely concerned with preserving history, no matter how morbid it may seem to others. They support the local scene, be it by attending Goth-themed parties or spreading information of Goth online.
Or both.
And yeah, it also seems a highly idealized perspective of Goth. But
well, yeah, they're pretty much.
I also don't think
they're talking about people pretty much sitting around smoking their clothes, talking about their literature,
yeah,
and then having little parties together that are so much fun with their wine and cemetery. In reality's
where we lay around and just smoke more.
Reality is just kind of not like that. But the clove smoking used to be. I haven't seen anyone smoking cloves. I haven't smelled a clove in a long, long time. But
yeah, because you can't get them. You got to order them from India or wherever.
Oh, I didn't know that. I don't smoke cloves. I've never liked them. Or wine.
Yeah, Obama signed a bill that banned flavored cigarettes because they were targeted to kids, and that included cloves.
Oh.
So now you can get like fake cloves, but they're not the same. If you want the real ones, you have to import them.
Couldn't you just cram a clove into a cigarette? Is that not the same?
That's too much work.
Yeah, but it wouldn't be black. You'd have to like put duct tape on it or something.
Spray paint it.
Permanent marker. Then I'm going to get cancer anyway.
Right. You just speed up the process a little bit.
Just draw the word goth on the cigarette.
Yeah, and the commodification thing, I don't really worry about. I mean, I don't want to get into the aesthetic thing because we talked so much about it on the last news episode. But there's little of the commodification that I worry about. Every once in a while, it does bleed into goth culture stuff, which I feel like is what has happened with the more ubiquitous goth brands now that kind of pushed out the independent designers. That I think is unfortunate. But then again, that's kind of always been an existential threat. I remember people talking about commodification of goth style in like the 90s. Mm-hmm. So it still hasn't killed it, and so I'm not incredibly concerned about it.
Yeah, it seems to be more resilient than I would have thought in like 1993. The first time I'm walking down the street and I see people fully dressed goths during the day just standing around, and I was like, what the fuck, man?
Yeah. In 20 years, Forever 21 is going to sell you that outfit.
Oh.
That's depressing.
So, all right. So let's get into the meat of this. So basically the way this article was structured is they have little snippets of quotes from a bunch of different Brazilian goths. And they cover a bunch of different topics. So the first one is Freon Sad, who is 33. I don't mean to laugh at people's goth names because mine is ridiculous, but I think that's kind of the point. To be funny and serious, and funny because it's too serious.
Maybe this was translated from Portuguese or something.
I'm pretty sure this was translated. Yeah. So, but let's see. So Freon says, I believe it was only when goths ditched mainstream media that our subculture and collective identity began to develop better. Goth never died. It's always been there. There's a lot of people who identify as goth today, but we've noticed that the relationship people have to the subculture itself has changed. Back in the day, we used to identify with gothic music and the overall attitude. Today, it's clear that a lot of people are mostly into the goth look. Our aesthetic has been packaged and sold, and people are drawn to the visual aspect. Having the look isn't the problem. The issue is only having the look and nothing else. Do you guys have any thoughts about ditching mainstream media? Because I think that's the more interesting part of that we haven't really necessarily talked about a whole lot.
Well, I'm
top 40 music, I guess.
I'm kind of wondering if what he's talking about is when goth stopped being part of the pop scene, because those early kind of goth transitional bands like Susie and the Banshees, the Karen, the House, were all kind of they're very, very popular, and they were on top of the pops, man. Susie and the Banshees was on top of the pops in 1978. So, I mean, was mainstream then, and it was co-opted, of course, back then, just like, or what is it, commoditized? Is that the word for it?
Commodified.
So I think maybe co-modified. So maybe what he's talking about is when it kind of died down some in the 80s, it was getting more underground. I mean, there was always the underground parts of it. It wasn't all like the Mission UK. And some of those bands that were popular in the 80s, they could never get popular now. That would never get to any kind of popularity close to that because they're so different and you have to think, and our pop music has lost that. But I think in the 90s, it was back to underground, and I know we have a misunderstanding with Marilyn Manson and what's that other band? Can't stand them.
Evanescence.
Oh my god, I hate him so much. Oh my god. But I also don't like Tori Amos, and Amy Lee sings like Tori Amos to me, where every single drip of sound has to be the world's most intense thing, and I just don't like that. But I think that
I can't wake up.
I just think that a lot of the
only
stuff.
Time you'll hear that.
A lot of the stuff that was out there that is goth or that people saw in the clubs, I have to study it because that's when I was absent, was more underground again. And also, like, I bought 3 volumes of gothic articles by Mick Mercer recently, and I've just started reading them. And he got to a point where he left mainstream, and he was like, you know what, fuck this. I'm just going to write for fanzines and newsletters and stuff because he just hated big magazines so much. So that could also be kind of what they're referencing here.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much concur. I mean, I think, obviously, I wasn't there when, that first wave of goth bands was really, I guess, sort of in the mainstream, but, I only really identify with goth as being underground. It's just kind of a sort of a pipe dream, just kind of a vision, or just a dream almost of what it would have been like.
Some kind of vision thing. Yeah,
vision thing.
I see, because I feel like goth hit. Because you're right, Michelle, you're right, but I feel like it hit peak mainstream media presence in the late 90s, early 2000s, because we had the Burton movies and the Addams Family, The Craft, the Anne Rice movie, I can't remember the name of for some reason, and a lot of that stuff was, even the Hot Topic stuff, like there were some magazines and dolls and like all that kind of stuff
Right.
seemed fairly popular. And the difference was, though, because I don't feel like we ditched the mainstream presence so much as it ditched us, because a lot of that stuff was embraced by goths, with the obvious exceptions like Manson to some degree, Evanescence obviously. But a lot of that, I seem to remember a lot of celebration of that kind of thing when it was done right, and a lot of it was fairly popular, which is why Hot Topic was able to be a chain store and sell almost exclusively goth stuff. So,
Well, do you count mall goth as goth?
oh yeah, I mean, yeah, because it was a baby bat thing, right? And it's I wouldn't fault someone for that being the entry point. And I think that was an entry point because that stuff was so popular, because it was in the mall, because it was on TV, and there were all these, cartoons and stuff like that. So people were getting exposed to it. And yeah, maybe obviously it was a specific, kind of watered down version, like modified version of goth, but it led a lot of people into stuff because Bauhaus was still getting, all the Banshees, they were all getting referenced in the same breath, right? They were on the Crow soundtrack and that kind of thing. So I don't know if there was.
I think you're right. I think I wasn't taking into consideration all the watered down stuff as goth.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I agree with you. I think I was wrong. From
internally, we obviously nitpick that stuff and say, well, it's not goth, but as a starting point, and I feel like in the 90s, that stuff did get mentioned in the same breath as actual goth stuff. And like, especially if you were going to Hot Topic, they would sell, Dancing Ferret compilations that had those goth bands on there and stuff like that. So they had the t-shirts they had, hanging on the wall. So you would get exposed to that kind of thing. So
even things like, coffin purses and spiky necklaces.
I always thought a lot of that stuff was just more fetish, but thinking about it now and having actually gotten my hands on a propaganda magazine and seeing, now I know why I didn't buy it, because it was like half modeling and I don't care about that. But I could see that was more goth scene stuff. I just think of it as like BDSM type fetish scene instead of the crossover, the mixing of the two.
Oh man, yeah, because I just read a really interesting. Did you ever read the book or hear of the book Goth's Stark Empire?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Well, Carol Siegel wrote it in I don't know, the early 2000s, I think, and it was basically supposed to be a defense of goth culture, but as being nonviolent, because it was shortly after the Columbine massacre,
right?
But the way she wrote about it was kind of positioning American goths as a part of the S&M community, and that was the way that they subverted mainstream gender expectations. And a lot of people were pissed off. And that was a long time ago. She just published a paper in an anthology in response to that. And it's absolutely ridiculous. I don't know. I'll have to find the name of it, the name of the book, but it's hilarious because it's an academic paper, so it's got all the jargon in there you would expect, but she basically whines the entire time about how she's so misunderstood, and the goths who disagreed with her were adolescent like crybabies, and it's absolutely ridiculous.
Oh, maybe they're taking shit because of her stupid book, because people are like, they're nonviolent. Okay, let's pick on them some more.
It's in the book Rethinking Difference in Gender, Sexuality, and Popular Music. So if anyone wants to actually look that up, it's a funny read, but just random aside. But yeah, and then the only other thing I wanted to mention is that I don't think you can point to a specific time that goths made an effort to move away from mainstream exposure, because it seems like it's just, it's the ebb and flow of whenever that picks up in popular media.
Right. I think we're
and we don't have much say about it.
I'm trying to remember ebb. Ebb is back, flow is forward.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
I think we're on
ebb
an
is
uptake.
like less. Yeah.
We're on a flow. I'm feeling things becoming more popular with the whole witchy thing. And I think it's going to hit more. I don't think we're at the top of that yet for right now.
I do think it's harder to tell now because of the way the internet is structured. Whereas in the past, most people got their media content from the same places, whereas now it's so divided up everywhere that it's really difficult to tell what any kind of cohesive zeitgeist for a bunch of people.
Right.
My feeling is that the new goth and the pastel goth and all that stuff has more or less faded, and that with the new wave of post-punk artists and dark wave that we're seeing now, it's more moving into the that kind of, I don't want to say hipster, but the more like indie mixing with post-punk and dark wave stuff.
Yeah, the post-punk and cold wave, dark wave, whichever you want to count in there. Having seen some of those shows, the people that go to the shows don't look so much like goths. And you have to go to like a traditional dark wave kind of concert before you start seeing that. It's kind of interesting when you're watching, because I went and saw Black Marble. Actually went to see Cold Cave, but Black Marble was the standout band for me personally, and I think they're cold wave, but they're just like wearing plaid shirts or whatever. They look authentic to me because they look like people did back in the 80s for the genre that is called post-punk.
Yeah.
It was interesting.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And then they were fantastic. So check those guys out. They're good.
All right, let me close Facebook because I'm getting too many notifications. You can't come on the show anymore. It's closed.
Too late.
All right, so Kai Hrist 23 says goth subculture basically mirrors the state of the soul. Everything we address in a way of feeling, expressing, and thinking, not only through music, but with respect to our look, perspective, and autonomy. We don't distinguish between gender, ethnicity, or sexual orientation, so it's more of a collective identity in every sense. All right, so ignoring the last part of that real quick, I was going to ask Scott this specifically because I know he's a Christian and his goth identity kind of interacts with that. But Michelle, for you and your specific views on spirituality or the lack thereof, how do you feel? How would you take that? Would you take it as more of like goth just mirrors your internal state, or is that too individualist?
Well, I think that a lot of goth subculture, because it's goth subculture to me is a surprise. You have this music scene that was very thriving in the 80s and was kind of petering out, and then here you are 40 years later and a subculture grew out of it. So it's kind of crazy. So I don't know that we have as much of the individualism as you did when you were younger, but I think that since every person expresses how they are goth a little bit different, I mean, once you kind of figure out what it is, once you're like done with your mall goth and you're like, oh, everybody does it a little bit different. You know what I mean? It's like if I stood next to you, we look very different, but yet we would both look goth. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think it does kind of mirror what's going on inside of you, especially when you're expressing your mode of dress or your aesthetic in an artistic manner that brings in whatever your religion is, whatever, because there's no state religion for goth, whatever your political views are, because again, no state politics for goth. I mean, there are some trends there, but you're going to see the conglomeration of what that person feels and what they are in how they express themselves through how they look, how they dance, what their environment looks like, as well as they can do for themselves. And it is still quite individual, even if you're looking at two people who look like they're wearing the same outfit, because there are some dresses that are real damn popular. They may have some things about them that are very, very different. Like this one might be more into ethereal wave, and this one in the same dress might be more into proto-goth or post-punk or neo-folk or something like that. So you're still going to have the musical expression of what you listen to is going to say something about you, even within what I call them the goth genres, like it's an umbrella. And it's so interesting to study the music, but we're just all do it different. No two people really do this the same. And the idea that we are becoming more cookie cutter is terrifying to a lot of people who enjoy that individuality, the commoditization. But I think a lot of those people, I think you're right. I think a lot of them are going to drop off, and some people are going to be just looking cool, and then someone's going to be walking down the street and they're going to catch eye and be like, "Sup, hey." And then they might learn a little bit more about what's really going on with goth, with the music scene and the actual subculture. Some will be attracted to it, some won't. And it'll kind of like shake out the chaff of the looks only or the I'm goth because I feel goth people.
Well, even though, it was said that, goth has no religion or political affiliation, I think people still can kind of use that aesthetic to maybe express their religious beliefs or political ideologies just in their own way. And so, yeah, I feel the same way about the cookie cutter trends that I'm seeing, because it really is a way to express, yes, how you're feeling, but also your tastes. And just, you can get creative and incorporate certain things, certain niche interests that you have maybe into your aesthetic. I think that's where you really get to see some cool, creative ways of expressing oneself.
Yeah. Yeah, let me think about that, because it kind of plays into the frustration I have with the notion that goth, if you are goth, that's your identity, or your whole identity, whereas I'm a goth and I am a gamer and I'm a what am I? What else am I? I'm a podcaster. I'm blanking on all the things that I'm into, but you get the like your identity is a amalgam of a bunch of different things. And I think maybe the problem was because the focus on subculture academically and culturally, I think, was for such a long time as this idea of a youth culture. When you're young, you're very much trying to find the group that you fit into and trying to conform to what that group is in your like totality of who you are. Whereas as you get older, it's very much not that. You are many different things, and you navigate how those all interact with, you have your D&D groups, and you go to the goth club and you have those friends, and you have your science and philosophy friends who you like to talk about those things with, or you have your your Game of Thrones friends, and you're like, maybe that story speaks to you on a fundamental level. And there's not really a problem with that, because we understand that intrinsically people are complex and there's a lot of moving parts. So maybe the notion of goth and other subcultures as a youth culture, at least initially, kind of drove that idea that it is this singular focus and you can't do anything outside of that, or they can't interact with other stuff.
Nah, I call bullshit on that.
Okay.
I didn't. No, they may be different in the 90s, but that is not the case of anyone I knew in the 80s. Everyone had like their weird kitsch thing that they were so into that nobody understood. Like, I knew somebody who was, I don't know if you would say that he was goth, but he had a thing for the Brady Bunch. He was like always watching the stupid Brady Bunch. It was just, you just never knew what the hell it was going to be. And most people were pretty varied, and I didn't know a lot of people who dressed up all the time. Like, you see people are like goth AF all the time. And they existed. Don't get me wrong. They did exist. Absolutely. But I think a lot of people were much more relaxed about it. It wasn't like, I am goth, I am all, because you didn't use that word. You just went and hung out with your friends. Other people in other areas did use that word. I'm just saying the people that I was around. So your experience is, of course, vastly different than mine. And somebody else from the 80s is in London is not going to have the same experience as me. And that would be the people I would expect to be all goth all the time. But in north of Dallas, Texas, nope.
I do think there was a sea change in the 90s, because with the second wave goth bands, there was kind of this defining of goth, like kind of coalescing into a thing. Whereas because there was such, we had the hippies and the punks, and then the new wave, and then the Blitz kids and everything. It was such a fast and furious artistic experimentation that there wasn't kind of an expectation to adhere to any given thing.
Well,
and I
they
do
were
think
mixed.
that
They were
exactly,
mixed way back then. They were much less mixed in the 90s. And now we seem to have people who, it's like a dichotomy of people who love metal and goth. That seems to be the big thing that is like the kids are doing with these two things now. It's very interesting from the outside as an old person.
And then I just, to touch on the second part of that, I generally agree, but I also think the idea that we don't distinguish gender, ethnicity, or sexual orientation is too idealistic and can potentially, because it can potentially lead to the problem where we feel like as a group we are progressive and liberated from these hurtful, patriarchal, like hegemonic dictates of society, and then that can cover up actual abuse and sexism and discrimination. That
hell
kind of
yeah.
thing.
I think on average, with acceptance, we're better, but we still have trans people who feel invisible, just like anywhere else. We're less violent towards trans people, I think, on average. But the sexism, oh my God, go-go dancers at like every fucking club. It makes me crazy. So it's like, I feel like it's always TNA on display or six-pack and booty on display with things that people are calling art and sharing in groups so frequently. And so I feel like we can do better. I understand that we have more sexual freedom, and I think that that really is apparent. I think it's very apparent that there is more freedom to explore sexuality of however you're going to do it. But I think that we also have those societal norms because we're just a subculture. I mean, we're not really a counterculture that's in your face sometimes, but, we still have those societal norms that are there. I think sometimes they're watered down, though, which is good. And we are generally progressive, but I've met goth amosexuals. They freak me out.
Yeah, and I mean, it kind of depends on the region, too, just what part of the country you're in. Because, I mean, I remember being at the club, it was a few months ago, and overhearing some guy talking about snowflakes and how, very, like, right-wing kind of person. And I'm like, that's interesting.
Yeah.
We don't get many of those here.
I had one who was a real conspiracy theorist. Because with the goth YouTube community, there's a few of us who are hunted by conspiracy groups that use conspiracy theory to try to hijack live streams and comment on videos, etc. But I've actually met a goth conspiracy theorist, like a prepper type of conspiracy theorist, a little over the top.
Wow.
People talking about their Second Amendment rights and just like, but not talking about their Second Amendment rights, but like open carry, owning AK-47 stuff that it's, I think, relatively unusual because it tends to be more, I don't want to say liberal because I'm getting to the point where I hate those terms, but more liberal. I just don't have a better definition right now.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a group of people who are, very much into that kind of thing, and those kind of people tend not to be goths, tend not to like goths, tend to want to shoot goths.
Yeah, until they're like fully participating members of the subculture, and they're still right wing on that level, and it's shocking every time I meet someone like that because a lot of people are just, they're not really, they don't care that much. They're just like live and let live, which I find extremely attractive.
Yeah, for sure.
Sorry, my son woke up crying, so I had to go help him out. All right, so Lay's Bittersweet, 28 years old. Adorable.
I forgot to go forward. She looks like she walked out in 1985.
Yeah, I don't have the photos
her outfit
up.
A lot. Oh, sorry. I'm going through the article because I just kind of want to read along.
All right, cool. So let's read what she has to say. Goth makeup and fashion are usually the first things that people are attracted to. But if we're going to talk about the visual aspects, we need to have a broader discussion to address in detail the significance of these elements in goth subculture. Our aesthetic combines several elements of art, cinema, and even 1980s fashion, and it exists within a social context. There's symbolism in everything. There's a meaning behind it all. Mohawks, makeup, and eyeshadow. Someone after my own heart. We put thought into how everything is represented in the goth scene. We actively try to avoid looking cheesy because that's how people can misconstrue the subculture's message. So when there's an interview that focuses on goths who hit up cemeteries to drink and dance on graves, it only reinforces the perception that that's all we do, which isn't the case. Most of us here share a very specific respect for graveyards, and we don't visit them that often. I'm against taking pictures or making videos at graveyards. They're places for visitation and remembrance. It's part of something important in society. People lost loved ones who have been laid to rest, and you need to be respectful about that. Graves aren't park benches you can sit on. They're not dance floors or cheap hotel mattresses.
Yikes.
What do you think about that?
Unless the dead person specifies that they want their gravesite to be that.
All right, there's that. I'm not sure. I know people who have fucked on graves. That does seem a little disrespectful to me, but having hung out in graveyards drinking as a young person as well, it was just kind of a quiet place to go, and I guess I never really thought about standing on someone's bones laid to rest, because also in my mind, they're no longer in that body, and the headstone is kind of the memorial, and the bones should become part of the earth again. So I don't really view this exactly the same as she does.
Well, I have two things to say about that. I think first of all, I do think that is more of a young person thing, because when you don't have any direct relationship with death and how impacting that is for someone, you you kind of interact with death in an awkward way. Mm-hmm. For me, because I agree, I think, once you're dead, like you go back to the earth, whatever. But when, you don't know who does or doesn't visit that grave. And for me, it's like, it's the people that are left behind that are very severely impacted potentially by the loss of someone they love. And they spend a lot of money on, that's what bothers me when I see people climbing on top of graves, like headstones and stuff, is like, you can break something. You can, if that was my dad, because he's going to be dead soon, I'm sure, to be blunt about it, I wouldn't want to see some punk teenager putting their ass on it just to take a photo, Right. So I don't have an issue with going to the cemetery at night and drinking or doing a ritual or whatever. I just think you shouldn't, even like sitting on top of the grave plot, I don't really have a problem with that. It's once you start doing stuff that could potentially damage a headstone or, whatever kind of stuff people have there, I think that's disrespectful. And I do see a lot of those articles because I get Google alerts, and I see, people that intend to break stuff, that, spray paint things or knock them over. But I think if you're doing something that could potentially damage a burial site just because you want to look cool I don't think that, I'm not okay with that.
Doing crap like that just because you want to look cool makes you a jackass no matter what. But also in graveyards, if you want to go there because they're peaceful, and they're very peaceful. People there are at rest. They're not full of a bunch of evil ghosts like horror movies tell you. They're just people at rest. But they always have benches somewhere. There are always benches somewhere. If you want to just hang out and feel that peacefulness kind of wash over you, which is kind of nice, then there's always somewhere to sit. It personally would not bother me if somebody was sitting on a gravestone that was sturdy, but climbing on it, defacing it, that is bullshit.
There are the cemetery by me, there are some places, some actual plots that have, like one in particular I'm thinking of, there's a large tombstone with a poem on it, and there's a cherry blossom tree on one side and a stone bench on the other side, and It's like made for you to sit there and contemplate life. And I think that's pretty cool. That's basically like an invitation to spend time there. But
Right. That's a thoughtful way to have a remembrance and to provide a peaceful space for people. And that's probably why they did it.
yeah. And so, and then Mark, do you have any thoughts on that? There's one other thing on there I wanted to.
Well, I would say, I don't personally have a problem doing photo shoots in graveyards. I mean, I've done them myself, but like you said, don't do anything really like lewd or gross. Obviously, don't do anything to deface any of the gravestones or leave trash there. Just be respectful.
Yeah, I mean,
I think it's pretty common sense.
The other thought is if you're putting photos online, where you're sitting, this just happened. One of my friends, they posted it. They were sitting on top of a headstone. You could clearly see whose it was, and they put it online.
Right,
and it's like if you came across that randomly, and it was someone that you loved, you might be kind of pissed.
Right.
So.
Right. It's more disrespectful to the living than the dead, I think.
Like, I guess a weird, maybe possible example would be, people who are car enthusiasts. Like if you are at a like Walmart and there's some really cool old car, they do photo shoots where you sit on top of cars and stuff, but you wouldn't just sit on someone's expensive car and like take a picture because it looks great, right? You would ask them, talk to them about it, and I think that's kind of similar, maybe. I don't know.
Right, yeah.
All right, so the only other part I wanted to touch on, that being the more sociology focused, is and without retreading the aesthetic stuff we already talked about previously on the other episode, and maybe I'm making too much of this, but they say there's a meaning behind it all. And I wouldn't go so far as to say there's a meaning behind everything, because I think it's okay to like something just because it looks cool without some deep philosophical reasoning. I do think in general, it should still reflect some aspect of art history or music or literature and so on. But that notion of subculture being interpreted through symbols was like a very early attempt at understanding subculture. It was the CCCS school of sociology, which is kind of really well known within that field. And the guy Dick Hebdige did a lot of that kind of work, where specifically with like punk culture, his analysis was grounded in this framework that subculture is the interpretation of images and objects, that basically the meaning of subculture consists of every object and symbol having a deviant purpose. So it was pretty extreme. It was like every symbol, everything you wore could be interpreted as a purposefully like deviant or disruption of mainstream culture. Like it all existed to be in opposition to broader culture, which is too extreme and it's too utilitarian. And I think that's it's been pretty, it's been critiqued pretty heavily, but it's, overall, basically it's just like, it's okay if you like stuff because it looks good.
Right.
You shouldn't only like stuff because it looks good. You shouldn't just live your life not thinking about anything, but it doesn't have to be like some super extreme philosopher level like nonsense.
Right. Well, that's interesting. I think one thing that is really interesting that's pulled from punk is the love of other people's discards. Like other people throw this shit away and we're just like, give it to me. If it's not black, I'll dye it black. I'll cut it up. I'll remake it. You won't even recognize what it was before. Yeah. And that spirit is not there for everybody, but it's still very, very strong in the goth subculture. And that's a punk ideal, and literally would be pulled out of the trash for punks.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it was in your face and they're like, oh yeah, well this is ugly. Looks good now, huh?
And I think in a broad sense, that was meant to be a critique of consumerist culture, to say,
Yes.
if you're just going to sell us everything, then we're going to wear trash and make it our own. But the problem was when you
Right.
take that to say, like, oh, this person had a pill bottle, so it's implicitly a critique of the
Yeah,
the medical industry, is like too much. You can't infer that just because someone had a
Right.
random thing.
Right, yeah. Wow. That's a good example.
All right, so Crow Corvo 29. He says, I think what human beings fear the most is the unknown. That's what most sociologists and psychologists say, hands down. Given that most people don't go to cemeteries very often in Brazil, it's not surprising that they always have questions. I'm frequently asked what I do when I go to a cemetery. I mean, people don't know what's going on or why I go there or how many babies I've killed. No, sorry, I put that editorializing there. The unknown aspect creates big fears about the place, and people wind up being afraid of us.
I think there's a truth
Yeah.
to that, to a good extent. I mean, what's the reason a lot of mainstream type people are afraid of goths? Is because they really, they all generally don't know what goth is about, so they start assuming the worst.
Yeah.
You know, the
They don't
sacrifices
understand it,
and
and they
what
just
have you.
assume, unlike the late 1800s, early 1900s, where people wore a bunch of black and did spiritualist stuff back then. They probably weren't understood either. So people are always afraid of what they don't get. And then in the US, we have that coupled with the long memory of Columbine, because that was just brought up recently
Right.
in all the Parkland moments of silence or whatever that was. Did you realize Columbine did
Was it?
32 minutes? Yeah, where schools all over the country did the 17 minutes of silence. I think Columbine did 30, or they did 17 plus a minute for every person killed in Columbine. So, yeah, that's been in the news a little bit lately, and we still have that stigma here, and especially of the big black trench coat. So we have that as much and more in the US, because we have people with long memories because they really enjoy being afraid. Sometimes it's convenient, so they'll leave you alone. But sometimes it's irritating.
Sometimes they won't leave you alone
It
at
goes
all.
both ways. Yeah, sometimes they just want to beat up what they're afraid of, or they want to scream in the face of what they're afraid of and stuff like that. I like it better when they cross the street to get away from what they're afraid of.
So I was trying to think about interesting ways to frame this, because we or at least me, I've talked at length about, like, why I enjoy cemeteries, what they mean. We just did a whole episode on it not that long ago. So I thought maybe a more novel approach would be to go on the fear thing and talk about, like, what you fear most, or one of your fears, and whether or not goth culture and cemeteries help you deal with that. And I looked up, if you guys want to think about that for a second, I actually, because he said that was fear of the unknown was one of the most common. I pulled up this article about the 5 most common, from Psychology Today, 5 most common fears, like more existential fears. And so the 5 were, the first one was extinction. So basically the fear of ceasing to exist. So that can include, death and that kind of thing. The second one is mutilation. So the fear of pain or losing parts of your body. The third one is loss of autonomy. So being paralyzed, restricted, entrapped, smothered, that kind of thing. Claustrophobia, that could come into there. The fourth one is separation, which is the fear of abandonment or rejection or loss of community. They say becoming a non-person. And then the fifth one is ego death, which is the fear of humiliation, shame, or disapproval. So do you connect with any of those?
Well, I would say that my biggest fear would be not being remembered, or not being not leaving any kind of legacy. Like when I'm gone, just, it being as if I had never existed. And obviously, I think, what are graveyards? They're a place of remembrance where you can remember those who've passed on. So, yeah, definitely in my case, I think it
has worked as
pertains.
like a therapy to kind of that.
Yeah, I think it is therapeutic.
Right. I think mine is probably that non-person, because that fear of being completely alone, as much as I value my alone time, so it doesn't necessarily make sense if you don't really think about it, but that fear of being completely isolated.
Yeah.
Just isolated. Nobody to talk to, nobody gives a shit, and we've all felt that, but having that be like a reality, like being stranded on a desert island. I mean, it'd be great for that first few days where all you did was sleep and there were no people, but then it would be that overwhelming sadness of just stuck in your own head and nowhere else to go.
The issue with feeling alone or feeling disconnected, has goth culture helped you with that? Because it's there's, at least with the online community, it seems like that could go two ways. It could be that, I've found a community, I've found friends that are meaningful relationships, and some people might feel like online communities are to a degree artificial and only aren't like a good substitute for a local community.
Oh boy, that's a loaded question.
Yeah. And you don't have to answer that if you don't want to, but.
Well, no, I already have an excellent support network.
Okay.
And so, I was like, what do I call it? Downtime, whatever, back and forth, away from, and I'm back. I feel like I'm back for good. I spent like 15 years trying to be what, other shit. How's that? Other shit. Where you say that most goths go normal at some point. Well, it took me longer. So I already have a really great support network, and I have had experience with an online relationship or relationships or whatever that were not what I thought they were, which was disappointing. But I think I have some others that are actually real friendships. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like somebody you could actually count on if you needed to. So I think it goes both ways. And I think there's a tendency with some people online, people who have a hard time making connections in general, may not be as truthful. And then you have other people who are just who they are when they're online and all the time. So, if you don't take a risk, you're never going to know. And it's just like the rest of life, you got to take a risk. I don't think it can fulfill you like a local scene if you participate in your local scene and you can make friends in your local scene, which I'm going to tell you, as an older person, a much older person, is much more difficult. But slow but sure, I'm infiltrating. I laugh about it, but yeah, making friends is it's just different when you're older, I think, because you're more discerning and you usually have a decent support network. So for a young person, I could see where it would definitely be a lifeline, though.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that online friendships, I don't think they're as good as, connecting to a local scene, but it's something, especially if you're, geographically isolated from anything.
Oh, yeah.
It's something. It definitely helps. It reminds you that you still exist.
Because, like, I've had very the last year and a half, there have certainly been moments dealing with, and maybe I'll cut this out, I don't know, dealing with my wife's depression and that those issues, that there's moments where it's just a week of or more of just constant like crisis mode, and I'm still alone, right? Because it's like a lot of times you get your support from your spouse when there's stuff going on with your job or with other friends, or you're stressed out from working a lot or whatever it is. And I have all those things, but when, I am constantly having to take care of someone else so that they don't kill themselves, it's like in those moments, the online network is cool, but it's like you still kind of feel alone and you still kind of feel lost. And so, but even, I guess it's not, maybe that's an unfair dichotomy, because even if you have a good personal support group in those moments, like, it's pretty rare that you would have a friend that could help you in those situations anyway. So maybe that's just a
Right.
life kind of thing. But
Well, in a situation like that, most people
Yeah.
just say, well, let me know if you need anything. But
yeah,
the problem is you don't really know that you need anything, or you don't know what you need because you can't think long enough to come up with something.
yeah. And there's still an issue with mental illness, because especially when it's a chronic or ongoing issue, because everybody goes through stuff. Everybody has, a few months where they're depressed or something happened, and they get support. But once that starts to stretch out to 6 months or a year or 2 years or 3 years, the patience of the people around you and their willingness to help kind of diminishes, because it's, for me, it's like I'm constantly having to give, and that is not an easy thing, but I can do it because it's for somebody that I deeply care for. But when it's just like, someone you're friends with that you go out to the club and stuff with, you don't, you have your own life. You're not going to continually like try and support people. So I guess that's more of just a person thing, and we've gone like way off track of what
Oh,
we're talking
yeah,
about.
but I think at the same time,
What was our topic
Cemeteries.
again?
oh yeah, that's right. Okay. But again, some people will just figure out that all you need sometimes is for someone to just sit with you,
Yeah.
even without talking. And I have friends who have been through they've been there for my darkest periods, like where I know I never have to go back there now.
Yeah.
I don't want to think about it too heavily because I don't want to get wrapped up in it.
Yeah.
But yeah, my best friend, old Blondie Bear that you see in my videos, yeah, I met her right before the darkest part of my life. And we're friends 17 years later. So we just kind of figured out, just keep hanging out and just be there, literally, physically be there, even if you don't talk about anything. It actually makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
So I have a history of depression, but lucky for me, it was not major. It was situational, and therapy worked.
That's good. Yeah, that's good. I guess my biggest fear is mutilation, because I am a soft boy and I don't like pain. Moving on. All right, so let's finish up here. All right, last response here from Natalie Snow 22. She says, I've often asked myself, dude, there are so many white girls around. There are so many white girls around you, and you want to be goth when you're already a person of color. It doesn't make sense to other people outside of the subculture who can't see beyond the popular point of reference. They always refer to European standards in which everyone looks alike, but I've realized I can be my own point of reference and become a role model for others like me.
Good. The whole thing with the pale skin, I get it, because it's supposed to emulate a deathly pallor. And that's where people forget. They just forget, and they think that you have to be a pasty white person to be goth, which is fucking ridiculous. And you don't. You just got to look a little green around the gills if you want to look kind of dead. And that's a little white face powder will do wonders for people of color to look just as dead as my pasty ass. So I don't get that ridiculous racism and that underlying feel of racism with wanting these perfect pale, girls, usually perfect pale girls or perfect pale vampire boys is, it's a nice aesthetic, but goths come in all colors, shapes, sizes, religions, backgrounds, etc.
Yeah, I agree, and I don't think I really want to say too much more other than to affirm, like, you be who you want to be, and but like I don't want to say too much, because I think in the past I've talked on these topics without the groups I'm talking about being represented in the conversation,
right,
and so I don't necessarily want to go too deep without that perspective. I will say there is, I think, a problem implicitly because the role models that we look to as the godfathers or godmothers of goth are all white, European, and thin. And so that expectation of peak goth for some groups and some places and some people, and maybe even internalized without people realizing it, still exists of this is what peak goth looks like.
Right.
And
even in photos, even in crowd scene photos, you don't see the representation of people of anything darker than like paste.
Yeah.
And they were there. When you would go out, there were always people of color. I mean, I live in fucking Texas. If there aren't Latinos there, you're like, what's wrong? So there have always been people of color.
Yeah.
And I think this woman is a badass for being goth in the midst of the basics. You know what I mean by basics?
Yeah.
Starbucks loving pink thing drinkers.
Me on the weekends.
To see more representation. Right. I'd like to see more representation. And actually at Mariluna, there was I just call it a goth underwear fashion show because I'm like, can we wear something besides underwear?
Yes.
How come the guys get to have a jacket and the women are all wearing literally underwear?
Yep.
But the first model that came out was black, and I was so excited just to see a non-white model up on a stage.
Yeah, we need to do
I'd like
better.
To see more of that.
We need to do better.
Right, and us white folks got to do better. But you're right, we shouldn't talk too much because, of course, apologies for racist stuff that doesn't apply to us.
Okay, so we've got the album review next. Let me actually, Michelle, I assume you want to duck out and go to bed, right? So especially since you haven't listened to the album.
I have. I'm just like, I got it open, but if I listen to it, I can't hear anything else.
Yeah.
Album review.
All right, this month we are reviewing the album Decade by the band Lost on Me. Lost on Me are a two-piece gothic post-punk band hailing from the northeast of England. Beginning in 2015, Lost on Me initially took shape as a solo project by guitarist, singer, songwriter Martin Downing. Heavily influenced by a variety of post-punk, gothic, and 90s indie bands, Lost on Me began as a private experiment in learning to sing whilst simultaneously writing and self-recording songs to accompany. So we are going to play track 5 off of the album, which is titled Another Way. right. So, Mark, why don't you tell me your thoughts about the album?
Okay. Well, I had never heard of this band, but I guess it's not surprising since we're like kind of focusing on the lesser known type.
I hadn't heard of them until I found them either. So,
okay.
Don't feel bad.
I didn't really. I only listened to the album once, and I didn't really write down anything, so I can't go like track by track or anything like that. I don't know. I'll say this much: I liked the second half of the album more than the first half. I don't know. I guess I just wasn't really big on this album. I think the guitar, had a nice ambience and everything. I thought the vocals were just too. I don't know if goth cheesy is the right word.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I thought it was just way too. And keep in mind, like, I could be a little bit burnt out on post punk because that's pretty much all they play at the club I go to.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I don't know, something about the vocals just didn't really. It wasn't as bad in the second half, but I think it felt like during the first half of the album, it was like he just kept yelling, and it was like non-harmonic or something. It wasn't necessarily off key, but it was just it didn't mesh well, I don't think, with the music. Or at least that's how it sounded to me.
I had the exact opposite opinion, but
really,
I'll get to that when you're.
Well, I mean, aesthetically, I think it fits well, but it just sounded like at some parts he was like kind of off key. And didn't you mention this was started as a project of the guy learning to sing, or didn't you describe it something like that?
Yeah. So I mean, I guess I'll just tell you how I felt about the singing only, because what I felt was I actually enjoyed the vocals, because it wasn't. I went the other way with the cheesy goth vocals that were kind of the "she passed away" mumbly deep vocal, or the more what we have now, the more common now, I think, the ethereal swishy vocals with like Drab Majesty. To me, I felt like he had more of a unique vocal delivery, which like is funny because to you it sounded like typical stereotypical goth vocal. And to me it sounded more unique, which is weird.
That is interesting.
I don't know if you're familiar with this band, but his singing to me sounded very, very similar to the Golden Apes, and even the music overall I thought sounded like that band, but his vocals sounded very much like he was. And I absolutely love the Golden Apes.
Yeah, I was gonna say, wasn't that like your favorite band or one of them?
So for me, it was like, I think their last album was in 2016. It was like, ooh, a new pseudo Golden Apes album. So maybe that was, maybe I was kind of overlaying my memory of that singer Pierre onto this band. I don't know, but I really liked it, the vocals at least.
Yeah, I mean, I thought they were just, one thing I noticed that I didn't really like. It felt like the guitars and like the instruments didn't have really enough room to breathe. It was like a song would start and it would be just instant instruments plus vocals. Like there wasn't really any time to just kind of just let the instruments go by themselves without singing over them. And that may have something to do with like the really short, not really short, but kind of short song length.
Yeah, they were pretty short.
Yeah, most of them clocking in around 3 minutes or under 3 minutes. Like I said, I think it did get better starting with track 5, Another Way. I liked Landslide and Balance, and Another Way I thought was pretty good. The first 4 tracks didn't really do much for me though. So I guess I'll give this maybe like a 2.75 out of 5.
Okay. My thoughts on the rest of it were, I really liked this album, and part of my reasoning was because I feel like I mentioned the ethereal stuff. I feel like the current bands that are making music right now are very post-punk or dark wave, and there's not a lot of what I would consider to be classic goth rock. So Michelle mentioned October Burns Black, which is very much I don't know, have you heard that? Their new EP?
No, I haven't.
I would definitely check it out. It's very much in that lineage of the Mission, Sisters of Mercy kind of arena goth rock, which is fantastic because nobody's making music like that. At least currently. Obviously, there's a lot of classic bands. And that's where I felt, while this wasn't that type of goth rock, I felt like this album was still goth rock. It wasn't death rock. It wasn't dark wave. It wasn't like the current iteration of post-punk. And so for me, I was really happy to hear somebody making music that sounded like that. I gave this a 4 out of 5. I would say, since we have such a disparity in our views on the album, we played track 5. That was one of the better tracks, in my opinion. If you liked that, you will enjoy the rest of the album. If you thought it was just mediocre, you may want to skip it. But yeah, for me, 4 out of 5.
So you've got to be interested in death. It's the last great taboo. It's the only taboo left.
Precisely. I mean, why is it, do you think, that everyone in here is dressed in black? It's a celebration of death.
No, I just like the clothes.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, the clothes look good. Yeah, I mean, death looks good. Charles Manson, yeah? No, he was cool.
Don't know if I mentioned it before, but I'm actually a vampire.
Sinister Suggestions.
Do you have any sinister suggestion? Otherwise, I'll just talk to myself. Or talk to you about my sinister suggestion.
Your sinister suggestion of playing with yourself once this podcast
ejaculating bats. I went to a all-night flea market last night, and there was one of the people there that appropriately they had hearses, but they were selling taxidermied bats in they have like the glass case with some kind of Victorian print behind it and a nice frame, and it was pretty cool. But they were all, the nicer ones were 125 and up, which is normal, but it's like, yeah, I can't afford that. So my sinister suggestion is, so a long time ago, probably maybe before Mark was on, I don't remember. I remember talking about Penny Dreadful at some point when it was actually airing. And it was like episode,
I think I vaguely remember you talking about that.
Yeah, episode 2 or 3 was out, and I talked about it. I dropped out of that show halfway through season 1 because it just got kind of dull. And I went back to it because everybody kept saying it was amazing. So I finished season 1, and then I got into season 2, and I watched through the whole. I'm into season 3 now, but my recommendation is Penny Dreadful season 2. To me, that season hit a high of production quality, storytelling, and everything you would expect out of that type of show, like Game of Thrones, Walking Dead kind of thing. It really, except for maybe 1 or 2 points in an episode that felt a little like it dragged a little bit, or it was a little bit off in the writing. Absolutely incredible. For all you got, this is definitely a goth suggestion. It's if you're not familiar, and like everybody is except me, I'm sure. Penny Dreadful is the story of Victorian England, where the main characters are like a werewolf and a vampire and someone who's possessed by Satan, and like There's Dr. Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster and the Bride of Frankenstein, and basically all the classic monsters are all intertwined into this story. And I think the problem with the first season was that it dragged out too much and the antagonist was not very strong. The storyline wasn't very strong. But season 2 was just absolutely incredible. If you haven't watched the show, I would say just watch season 2. The only thing in season 1 is just like it tells the story of those characters meeting up and like interacting and getting comfortable with each other. But I don't think you necessarily need that. If you just grant the show that like they all have their backstories as like becoming part of a team, those 11 episodes of season 2 are like much must-watch TV, in my opinion. I don't have an opinion on season 3 because I'm only 2 episodes in, but my God, there's witches and demons and, you know, the classic like Victorian mental asylums, and like it's bananas. There's a scene where you have Dorian Gray throwing a ball in his ballroom, which is just like gaudy Victorian decadence, and you've got all these people dressed up, and you've got like, you know, orchestra playing music, and then at the end of the scene it's just literally raining blood, and just it's absolutely fucking incredible. That for that scene alone you should watch that season. I can't recommend it enough. If you haven't seen Penny Dreadful, or maybe you were like me and you bounced off the first season, jump into season 2 and give it a try. I think it's worth it.
That kind of like, not so much the plot, but just kind of reminds me of Buffy, the show, just where season 1 was kind of getting to know the characters and the real action starts in season 2.
Yeah.
I just drew that comparison just whenever you were describing, you know, how compared to season 1, season 2 just like starts kicking a lot of ass.
And Buffy's something I need to go back and watch too. I think the reason I watched it was because it was on Netflix. So I used my mother-in-law's account, and I was like, oh, look at that. My only other suggestion, I don't know if you guys have heard of this book called Harry Potter.
Nope.
But I'm into books, halfway through book 6 now, and absolutely in love with it. So
yeah, it's incredible.
If you haven't read Harry Potter, do yourself a favor. And
You've read Harry Potter. Like, yeah, everybody's read.
I'm the last.
Yes,
the last of his kind. Anything you have been hanging out with or enjoying as far books or movies or what, or music, anything?
Well, I did see a concert recently. Like, I hadn't been to an industrial show in such a long time.
Yeah.
You know, like I said, most of the club night, just about all the club nights I go to are really heavy on post-punk, and they bring a lot of like lesser-known post-punk bands into. But I did catch Cyanotic's tour when they stopped in Cincinnati, and I thought it was a really solid show. Like, despite some of the technical difficulties at the beginning, like, I thought every band really did well. So if you get a chance to catch one of those dates on that tour while it's still going on.
I don't know if I have heard that band before. I'll have to look them up.
It's kind of agro-techy type stuff, sort of.
Thank you again, Michelle, so much for coming on. If you enjoyed the show, please stick around. In a couple weeks from now, we'll be back with a very important episode, perhaps the most important episode we've ever done. We will be having on an expert panel, including Andy Harriman, Alex Reed, a friend of mine, Shannon, who co-owned a record label and was a editor for Industrial Nation, and Allie, who is a grad student and has written about this subject before. They'll be coming on to talk about the problem of misogyny in industrial and in the scene. This is a very, very important episode, very emotional, very personal, and we're really going to call some people out on their shit. As always, thank you so much to our Patreon members. I just got done doing a live stream for Patreon, and it was a lot of fun. It was great to hang out with everybody. We had a special guest on, and had a full chat room. So if you're interested in supporting the show, or you want to get access to some bonus content, head over to patreon.com/Cemetery Confessions and take a look at what you can get for just $1 a month. I apologize. My dog is scratching himself in the background. He just had surgery, and the poor guy has a cone on his head, and he's not happy about it. So, as always, I'd like to take a moment here and thank our Patreon members because, as you know, this show does not exist without your support. At the founders level, we have SJ, Esmeralda, and Stella. Thank you all so much for your continued support of the podcast. I hope you are enjoying the mugs. We just sent out, if anyone didn't get their mug, please let me know. At the Nocturnal Council level, we have Kyra, Dawn, Jason, Sarah, Natalie, Michelle, Azzy, Michelle, Thomas, Trey, Amber, Fifth Dream, Nephilim and Corruptus, Matt, Stevie, Ivy, Mike, Kay, and Heather. And at the Crow's Call level, we have Miranda, Dave, Isabel, Christina, Esther, Such Horrors, Dolly Dagger, Paula, Joe, Irene, Becca, Kelly, Isidoro, Sarah Monster, Dom, Michelle, Vokun, Marco, Crowellin, Stuart, Isabel, Margarita, Christian, Marissa, Jamie, Kimberly. It's okay, baby. It's okay. What does it matter? Oh, you want some attention? Hang on, bud. Iris, Alex, Shelly, Mr. Polar Bear, Dagger Dance, Caroline, Alana, GPS, Eternal Winter, Bronwyn, David, Angel, Anne, Heather, Honora, Skiamakos, Laurel, Kelly, Jen, Joseph, Susan, William, Beth, and Christine. Thank you guys so much. It's been a pleasure to have you supporting the show and a pleasure to get to know you over the years and months. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. Until next time, stay dark.
The preceding program is a member of The Belfry, a network of blogs, podcasts, and videos for the darkly inclined. Go to thebelfry.rip for more information.